The attorney stepped forward, giving a small, reassuring nod. Gwen? For the court? Can you explain why you're here today? For a moment, Gwen paused. The air vibrated with the weight of the question. You could practically hear her pulse in the silence. And then she spoke, slowly, deliberately, but with words that had the power of a storm. I'm here because I've been silent too long. I'm here because for years I was instructed not to speak, not to tell, not to cause strife, but being silent nearly killed me. I don't want to bear that silence anymore, and I don't want any other child to have to endure what I did. Her words cut through the room. Christine's shoulders heaved as tears slid down her face. Janelle reached across, squeezing her arm softly, speaking to her quietly, something only Christine could understand. Even Robyn, normally reserved, covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wet with tears she couldn't suppress. But the one person Gwen never even glanced at was Meri. The ex-stepmother was as still as a statue at the defense table, staring at Gwen as if she wished to bore holes into her, but Gwen refused to let her have the pleasure. Her eyes remained fixed on the front. The attorney inched nearer. Can you describe to the court what your childhood was like, living within that house? Gwen gulped a trembling breath. She glanced down for an instant, mustering her nerve, then raised her eyes again. Her voice shook, but strengthened with each word. On television, we looked like smiling people. We looked like family dinner. Group hug, kids playing together. We looked love. But behind closed doors, it wasn't always so. There were times of fear, times when words weren't just harsh, they were intended to hurt, times when discipline crossed the line. And I remember nights that I slept crying because I didn't feel safe. The room shifted uneasily. Some onlookers wiped their eyes. Others craned forward, hanging on her every word. Can you provide an example? The lawyer asked gently. Gwen nodded, tears now shining in her eyes. There were occasions when I was spoken to so rudely. I felt like I was nothing. I was informed I was bad, that I wasn't thankful, that I was the issue. I recall once, I think I was about 11. I did something small, something tiny, and the punishment wasn't equal to what I had done. I was physically grabbed, screamed at, and I recall thinking, why does she dislike me this much? Why am I never good enough? Christine's weeping cut through the quiet then. She attempted to cover her mouth, but the sound rang out in the courtroom. The judge offered her a compassionate look, but no reprimand. How could he? A mother was listening to her child reenact trauma she could never erase. Janelle moved in close to Christine, whispering, "It's okay, she's brave. She's so brave." Gwen's voice broke, but she continued. When it kept on happening, I stopped telling everyone. I figured no one would ever believe me. I figured it would just make more fights. So I kept quiet, and that silence. It consumed me. It made me feel invisible. The attorney gave her a tissue. Gwen accepted it, drying her tears, and went on. I'm not here to get revenge. I'm not here to destroy someone's life. I'm here because I want the truth to be heard at last. What was done to me should never happen to anyone else. If saying something means another child won't have to endure this, then it'll be worth it. The power in her words was undeniable. Even those who had come to support Meri shifted uncomfortably in their seats. You could see doubt in their eyes, as if Gwen's pain reached places they couldn't ignore. The defense attorney rose for cross-examination, his tone sharper. Miss Brown, isn't it true that sometimes children exaggerate? Isn't it possible your memories are colored by time, or by your mother's opinions? Gwen didn't blink. She moved nearer to the microphone, her voice firm. With all due respect, pain doesn't go away over time. You don't forget evenings you cried yourself to sleep. You don't forget the sound of footsteps outside your door, waiting to see if you'll be the one again. You don't forget words that cut so deep they reverberate for years. No, this isn't hyperbole. This is my truth. Gasps resounded throughout the room. Christine stiffened, a look of pride and heartbreak on her face. Robyn dropped her head, quietly wiping away tears. Janelle's lips narrowed into a thin line, her contained fury simmering just below the surface. Kody remained still though. Arms folded, lips pursed, eyes staring at the table. But tension in his face gave him away. He could no longer deny it. He could no longer preserve the facade of the perfect family he had worked so hard to peddle. His daughter's words had cut right through all of it. The lawyer attempted again. But Gwen, you might have told your father, couldn't you? Why didn't you? Her response was immediate. Because I knew he wouldn't listen. Because every time I tried, the blame landed back on me. Because in that house, defending the image was more important than defending the kids. Her words landed like hammers. The courtroom was still except for Gwen's repressed sniffles. At last, she turned her gaze to the judge. I carried this with me for years. It made me dislike myself. It made me question whether I was damaged, whether perhaps I did deserve it. But I know today, I didn't. I was just a child, and children are entitled to safety. Children are entitled to love. And I will no longer remain silent. The judge's face relaxed as he nodded. Thank you, Miss Brown. Gwen settled back, tears streaming uncontested down her face. But this time, they weren't tears of anguish. They were tears of freedom. She had said something. She had been heard, and in that instant, the courtroom wasn't simply full of grief. It was full of something else as well. The feeling that Gwen's voice was finally shattering chains that had held her hostage for so long. When Gwen finished her testimony, the silence in the courtroom was almost unbearable. The words she had spoken still hung in the air, raw and unshakable. For many it felt like the truth had already been laid bare. But now it was Meri's turn. The defense table rustled. Her attorney, a tall, crisp man in a well-pressed suit, stood with studied assurance. He cleared his throat, straightened his glasses, and turned to face the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, he started, his tone smooth. What we heard from Gwen was emotional. Yes. But feelings are not always truth. Memories can be tenuous. Points of view can be manipulated. And in this instance, we believe the narrative being presented has been crafted by years of external voices, family stress, and the natural passage of time. Glowering murmurs broke across the room. The lawyer went on, his arm sweeping toward Meri. Meri Brown is not a monster. She is a woman who co-raised children within a complex, unorthodox family environment. Were there rules? Yes. Were there instances of discipline? Of course. But abusive parenting is not tough parenting. Passion within a household is not cruelty. And to take small moments, stretch them and twist them into accusations, that is not justice. He hesitated, allowing the words to sink in. Today, we will demonstrate that Meri was not abusive. She was misunderstood. She was overwhelmed, perhaps even deficient at times, but never sinister. We will demonstrate that Gwen's recollections, although strongly felt, do not represent the whole truth. With that, he nodded toward his client. Meri Brown will now testify. Everyone shifted attention to her. Meri stood up slowly, hands folded in front of her tightly. Her face was white but stubborn. Walking to the witness stand, you could feel the room change. Gwen had testified with emotional honesty. Meri walked with a combination of hurt pride and desperation. She was sworn in, sat down, and leaned into the microphone. Her attorney stepped in. Meri, please tell the court how you envision yourself as a parent. Her voice was firm initially. I was a mother, possibly not by blood, to all of them, but in every sense that counted. I attempted to be a mother. I looked after those children. I loved them. I gave them my time, my energy, my life. Did I do things wrong? Yes. Every parent does. But I never had any intention of hurting Gwen or any of the children. Never. Her attorney nodded encouragingly. Some might say you were strict. Were you? Yes, she admitted. I had rules. I felt children needed structure, needed to learn respect. And sometimes that required being firm. But firm does not equal abuse. My goal was always love. Always. She shifted at last, allowing her gaze to encounter Gwen's. If Gwen was hurt by me, then I am sorry. I truly am. That wasn't ever my intention. But what is being described here? It isn't who I am. It isn't the mother I attempted to be. Christine's face contorted with those words. She shook her head, muttering under her breath. Not the mother you attempted to be. Then who was it with us? Who was beyond those closed doors? Janelle wrapped an arm over her shoulder, attempting to soothe her, but her own lips were pursed in fury. The defense attorney pushed on. Meri, did you ever physically abuse Gwen? Her gaze constricted. No, never. I may have yelled, I may have imposed restrictions, but I never hurt her physically. But then, the cross-examination started. Gwen's lawyer came forward, with a folder full of papers. His voice was even but edged as a razor. Meri, you just testified that you never hurt Gwen physically. Is that true? Yes, she said emphatically. He opened the folder. And how do you account for the words of Gwen's siblings? Several siblings. Not one. They talk of instances when your anger went too far. They recall Gwen sobbing, scared. Are they all liars? Meri's face burned. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Children exaggerate. They perceive things differently. And if you remove those moments from context, the lawyer cut in, out of context, or undeniable. He pulled out another sheet. These are Gwen's journal entries from her teenage years. She wrote about nights she feared you, about punishments that left her feeling unsafe. Were her private words, written long before this trial, also just exaggerations? The jury leaned forward. The tension was thick. Meri's lips trembled, but she tried to hold her composure. I don't know what she wrote, but I never meant to hurt anyone. I was fighting too. This family. It was tough. The cameras, the pressure. Maybe I wasn't always soft, but I wasn't cruel. The attorney stepped closer again. So you're telling me Gwen conjured the fear? That she conjured being shut up? That her crying, her hurting, her losing sleep, those were lies? Meri's fingers curled in her lap. I'm telling you, she got it wrong. Gasps rippled through the room. Christine spoke viciously under her breath. Got it wrong. How do you get fear wrong? Her voice broke on anger and grief. Even Robyn, who usually remained silent in family disputes, seemed discomfited. She adjusted her seat, her forehead wrinkled as if suddenly she couldn't decide where her allegiance should be. And then, the most shocking moment, Gwen's attorney turned to Kody. Mr. Brown, you were the patriarch of this family. Did you ever observe Meri's behavior towards Gwen? The room came to a halt. Kody slowly uncrossed his arms, his jaw clenching. Everyone stared at him. His daughters, his wives, the jury, everyone awaited his response. He cleared his throat, his tone deep but ponderous. I saw things. I heard things. I should have gotten involved more. I didn't. That was my fault. But I can't deny that Gwen's words, they're not out of nowhere. It was like a bomb had gone off in the room. Christine dissolved into new sobs. Janelle shook her head, whispering. Finally, Robyn looked down, tears streaming silently down her face. And Meri? She froze. Her face turned ashen. Her lips parted slightly as though the ground had crumbled beneath her feet. The man she had once called her husband had just undercut her entire defense. The truth can no longer be hidden. Those words did not ring through the courtroom. They reverberated through the foundations of every person there. The gavel of the judge came down hard on wood, sharp and authoritative, silencing the already strained room. This was not just another day in court. This was not some muted, forgotten lawsuit. No, this was the day that Gwen Brown, the child of Christine and Kody Brown, faced off with Meri Brown, her old stepmother, in a fight no one ever dreamed would occur. If cameras had been permitted inside, the world would have witnessed history. Viewers who had been watching Sister Wives for more than a decade, individuals who thought they knew this family's narrative, would have been shocked. What had seemed in earlier times to be a reality TV family soap had now become a real-life courtroom battle. And there, in full view of the law, the ideal picture of a plural family was being torn asunder, piece by agonizing piece. The air within the courtroom was stifling. You could sense the tension, thick and oppressive, like a storm brewing for decades, that finally was going to burst. Every seat was taken. Every observer had their head forward, not daring to even breathe too hard. It wasn't a trial. It was an accounting. Front row sat Gwen, her face ashen but her shoulders set. She wasn't there to sensationalize. She wasn't there to embarrass. She was there for truth, for closure, for responsibility. For so long she had been required to swallow her hurt, to bear the load of silence. But today was different. Across the room from him was Meri Brown, shoulders tensed, lips pursed into a thin line. Gone was the woman who smiled brightly for cameras. portraying herself as the doting family matriarch. This woman appeared a stranger. Her eyes flitted every so often to Gwen, but they were hasty, evasive glances. The kind of glance one gives when one does not wish to meet the full force of what is about to unfold. Behind them, the rest of the Brown family took up the benches, each one bringing their own tempest of feelings. Christine sat nearest to Gwen, her expression set with sorrow and resolve. She had known this day would arrive. A part of her had dreaded it, but another part of her recognized that it was inevitable. Next to her was Janelle, her normally serene expression furrowed by obvious anxiety. She clenched her hands together, unable to hide her apprehension. And then there was Robyn. She sat apart, not too close to Christine and Janelle, but not on Meri's side either. Tears already glistened in her eyes, her expression a mix of disbelief and devastation. For so long she had been careful with her words, careful with her alliances. But here, in this courtroom, neutrality was impossible. In the center of it all was Kody Brown, arms folded tightly across his chest, jaw set so tightly you could see the muscles flicker. His golden curls, once the emblem of his pride and charm, lay heavy and disheveled, as if even he couldn't muster up the energy to keep up appearances any longer. He didn't glance at Gwen. He didn't glance at Meri. His gaze remained pinned to the ground, as if the glossy wood floor might somehow wipe away the reality that his family was disintegrating in public. This wasn't merely a case. This was a war of families, dragged out into the light of day for all to witness. The whispers had lingered for years. Fans had speculated, siblings had hinted, and Christine had borne the weight of guilt. But whispers were so easy to brush off. Whispers were so easy to deny. Whispers were so easy to call exaggeration or drama. But today, those whispers had turned into sworn testimony, had become evidence, had become inescapable fact. The judge leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. This court is now in session. Each heart skipped a beat. Gwen shifted slightly in her seat. To most, she looked like a young woman facing the weight of something unbearable. But if you looked closer, you could see the strength in her eyes. You could see the years of silence breaking apart inside her, replaced by determination. She wasn't here as just Kody and Christine's daughter. She wasn't here as just another Brown child. She was here in her own right. A woman who had made it through. A woman who had survived. And a woman who was now prepared to speak. Silence fell across the gallery, as all waited for the first words to be said. Even the rustle of papers sounded too loud, too intrusive in this weighty moment. Christine's hand quivered as she covered it with her mouth, already suppressing tears. She was aware of the burden that Gwen was on the verge of sharing. She had borne it in silence for years, aware of her daughter's reality, but afraid of what would happen if she spoke it out. And now, here they stood, that silence at last broken. Janelle leaned slightly toward Christine, whispering, "She's stronger than any of us realized." Christine nodded, her eyes never leaving her daughter. Robyn dabbed her eyes with a tissue, whispering something under her breath. A prayer, perhaps? Or maybe just words of regret. Her loyalty had always been complicated, her position always controversial, but even she knew this wasn't something to deny anymore. And then there was Kody, and if anyone had thought that he would stand, would defend, would take charge of the room, as he used to take charge of his family, they were made to wait. He kept quiet, his expression chiseled from stone. But silence has its own voice, and his was deafening. As the attorneys worked on their opening remarks, the room seemed to close in. All of them leaned forward, suspended between fear and expectation. This was no longer simply about Gwen and Meri. This was about all of them. About a family's legacy, about the lies they'd sold the world, about the hurt that had been contained behind the gleam of sister wives. Gwen's attorney stood up first, his voice adamant and unshakable. He pointed to Gwen, his words cutting through the room like a knife. "This case is about truth. For years my client was silenced. For years she bore pain no child should ever bear. Today, she will speak. Today, she will be heard. And today, accountability will at last have its seat in this family." The words struck like thunder. Christine bent her head, the tears falling unchecked. Janelle took hold of her arm. Robyn's lips were shaking as she looked at Gwen. Kody's jaw set harder. And Meri went white. She seemed small, for the first time, as if the walls of the courtroom were shutting in on her. As Gwen finally stood from her chair, all eyes were on her. The room did not simply fall silent. It caught its breath, and in that instant, Gwen Brown, who had been only one more kid in the vast, messy Brown clan, stood taller than she ever had before. Because what this was not the start of a trial. It was the start of the end of silence. As Gwen moved toward the witness stand, the whole courtroom moved with her. Not just footfalls on the highly polished floor, but the sound of years of muteness, at last being brought into light. She appeared young, vulnerable, almost delicate. Yet there was also something else within her stride. Strength, conviction, a quiet flame that no one could extinguish. The bailiff held up a hand. "Do you swear to tell the truth? The whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God." "I do." Gwen's voice wavered at first, but remained firm enough. She sat down, tugged on the microphone, and clasped her hands tightly in her lap. Her attorney floundered, attempting to catch up. "Members of the jury, you have to recall. Emotion is strong, but we can't convict on emotion alone. See the facts, see the inconsistencies." But it was too late. The momentum had changed. Meri's defense wasn't simply weak. It was crumbling in real time. Meri turned her face away from the jury, staring at the table, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. For the first time, the woman who once prided herself on strength looked utterly broken, and everyone in that courtroom knew it. Gwen's truth had struck deeper than any defense could repair. If Gwen's testimony had broken the base of the Brown family, and Meri's defense had rattled its walls, then what followed would have the entire house tumbling down. Because one by one, the other wives, and even Kody himself, were drawn into the tempest. The prosecutor stood up, his face serious. "Your Honor, at this time, we would like to call Christine Brown to the stand." Christine gasped softly, her hand shooting to her chest. She hadn't figured on being summoned so early. Janelle squeezed her hand in wordless encouragement, whispering, "You can do this." Christine nodded tremulously, dried her tears, and stood. Everyone's eyes were on her. As she made her way to the witness stand, she seemed smaller too, shouldering years of guilt on her frame. The bailiff administered the oath, and she settled into the chair, fidgeting with the microphone in nervous fingers. "Mrs. Brown," the prosecutor started softly, "you resided in the same house Gwen was raised, and can you inform the court of what you saw?" Christine's lips quivered. She shut her eyes for an instant, then compelled herself to gaze at Gwen. "I saw things I wish I could erase," she whispered. "I heard things I wish I had silenced. There were nights when Gwen wept, and I told myself it was just normal parenting, that perhaps I was reacting too much. But I knew that she was suffering, and I didn't do enough." Her voice cracked, and she hid her face in her hands. "I failed her. I failed my daughter. You were my daughter. You were my daughter." Gwen's own eyes filled, but she whispered softly, "It's okay, Mom." The room was quiet only for Christine's cries. The prosecutor put a gentle hand on the edge of the stand. "Christine, did you ever confront Meri about her behavior?" "Yes," Christine confessed, wiping her face. "I did try once. I said she was too hard on Gwen, that she was scared to death. She flared back at me, and said I was undercutting her. And after that, I shut up. I regret it every day." The defense attorney jumped up. "Objection, Your Honor. Speculation. One woman's opinion." But the harm was already done. Christine's words had cut the room like knives. The court then summoned Janelle Brown. Janelle proceeded to the stand, with her chin raised high, although her eyes gave away her fatigue. She had always been the sensible one, the composed pillar. But this day, her calm veneer was fissured. "Mrs. Brown," the prosecutor started, "did you ever observe Gwen's behavior or feelings shift in childhood?" "Yes," Janelle replied emphatically. "I saw Gwen become quieter. She was once so lively, outspoken. But as she grew older, she pulled away. She was scared to speak up. And I recall her shying away from Meri, like being in the same room was too much." Her voice was calm, but her hands fidgeted on her lap. "I remember times when I attempted to comfort Gwen, and she wouldn't talk. And now I know why. She didn't feel that anyone would be listening. And that's our fault. That's my fault. I could have done more. She looked at Gwen, her voice beginning to break. I want to say this to all of you. Gwen, I apologize. I'm so sorry. The jury shifted uncomfortably. These weren't strangers talking about Meri. These were fellow wives, mothers, women who'd lived in the same walls. Their words meant something that no lawyer's appeal could erase. And then Robyn Brown. Everyone leaned forward. Robyn had always been the most guarded with her words, the most protective of the family image. Her loyalty was complicated. No one knew what she would say. She ambled out to the stand slowly, her tissue already in her hand. After taking her oath, she glanced over at the prosecutor, crying openly. Mrs. Brown, he started, you married into the family later, after Gwen was already raised. Did you ever hear or notice anything out of the ordinary about her relationship with Meri? Robyn sniffled, agreeing, yes. I wasn't present for the early years, but when I entered the family I saw tension. Gwen and Meri kept their distance from one another. I asked once, and I was told it was teenage angst. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe everything was all right. She dried her tears, but eventually I heard the murmurs. I noticed how Gwen's body stiffened around her. I brushed it off. I told myself, this is not my business. I'm new, I should not rock the boat. And now I wish I had spoken up. Her voice shattered. If only I could do things over, I would speak out. Gwen, I apologize for not defending you. The jury's faces melted. Even the cynics in the room were able to hear the confluence of voices making a compelling truth. At last, the prosecutor brought in the witness everyone was waiting to hear. Kody Brown. Come on up here. The air was electric with tension. Kody slowly stood up, smoothing his matted curls. He made his way to the podium with the weight of the whole family on his shoulders. Upon swearing in, he took a seat, his jaw clenched. Mr. Brown, the prosecutor started. You were the head of this family. You managed the house. Did you ever see Meri's treatment of Gwen? The silence that ensued was oppressive. Kody shifted uncomfortably, arms crossed. His confidence was nowhere to be found. For the first time he appeared beaten. He hesitated, looking over at Gwen, then over at Meri. I saw tension. I saw harshness. I heard yelling. And yes, I ignored it. I told myself it was normal. I told myself Meri was just being strict. I didn't want to face what was really happening. The room burst into whispers. Kody swallowed hard. I failed Gwen. I failed as a dad. I should have gotten involved. I should have protected her. But I didn't. And that's my fault. Christine wept openly. Janelle shook her head, crying. Robyn hid her face in her hands. And Meri's jaw dropped open, her face going white as a ghost. The man she had once relied on, stood up for, loved, just confirmed the very things she was denying. The prosecutor's tone was level but authoritative. So Mr. Brown, are you telling this court that Gwen's testimony is accurate? Kody paused, then nodded. Yes, I believe her. Gasp waves ran through the courtroom. Jurors exchanged shocked glances. Spectators leaned forward, devouring every word. The Brown family, once a symbol of unity, fragile as it was now rent apart before the world. Christine shattered, Janelle enraged, Robyn devastated, Kody ashamed, and Meri cornered. The family wasn't merely split, it was decimated. The courtroom had transcended being a hall of justice. It was a war zone of memories, tears and shattered relationships. Each testimony, from the shaking voice of Gwen to Kody's grudging admission, had reduced to rubble the walls Meri worked so hard to construct. Now silence. The silence that weighs more than thunder hung in the air. The judge's gavel came down once. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you may now begin your deliberations. The 12 jurors made their way out, their expressions inscrutable. As the solid door swung shut behind them, the atmosphere in the courtroom became stifling. The waiting game. Christine sat holding a crumpled tissue in her lap, mouthing silent prayers. Janelle paced the narrow area at the rear of the defense table, her jaw clenched,
her anger emanating like heat. Robyn quietly wept, sitting against the bench, as if the pressure of it all was bearing down upon her to the floor. And Kody sat stone still, his eyes fixed on the floor, his face pale. His words still lingered in the room. "I believe her." Before them Meri sat rigid, her eyes flicked from side to side in search of support. But none of the family members dared look at her. Even her lawyer continued to keep his eyes downcast, writing notes without finding solace. For the first time, Meri felt completely isolated. Gwen sat a few rows back, surrounded by friends, who had shown up to support her. She was pale and tired, but her eyes contained something they never had before: strength. She was no longer the frightened little girl who curled up in her room. She was the woman who stood up and spoke the truth. The jurors deliberated for hours. The clock ticked loudly, each second stretching like an eternity. Every cough, every creak of a chair, echoed through the tense courtroom. At last, the door creaked open. The bailiff entered. "All rise." The jury had returned. The verdict. Everyone stood up. Gwen's hands trembled. Christine and Janelle instinctively clutched each other. Robyn grabbed her heart. Kody closed his fists so hard his knuckles became white. Meri stared at the jurors, as if a show of will might turn their minds. The judge regarded the foreman. "Is the jury ready with a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." The courtroom fell silent. You heard the rustle of the paper as it was passed over. The foreman slowly unfolded it, his tone firm but weighted. "In the case of Gwen Brown against Meri Brown." He paused, tension hanging heavy in the air. "We, the jury, find the defendant liable." Gasps were heard throughout the room. Christine began to cry, her shoulders shaking as she wept. Janelle covered her eyes, her lips quivering with relief and grief. Robyn gripped the bench and whispered, "Oh God." It had concluded an era.
And Gwen's eyes welled up with tears. But those tears were not tears of pain. They were tears of vindication. She buried her face, crying as her friends encompassed her. The judge's voice cut through the chaos. "This court finds Meri Brown responsible for the emotional harm inflicted upon Gwen Brown. Sentencing will follow." Mary's face went pale. Her body slumped into the chair, as if the very strength had drained from her. Her eyes darted wildly toward Kody, silently pleading. But Kody wouldn't meet her gaze. He sat there, broken, staring at the desk in front of him. For the first time, Meri realized she had lost not only the case, but her family. The aftermath in the courtroom. With the gavel again brought down, ending the trial, the courtroom exploded. A few gasped, some murmured, and reporters frantically took notes. Christine hurried toward Gwen, embracing her daughter. "You did it," she exclaimed. "You were so brave." Janelle put a hand on Gwen's shoulder, her voice clear but soft. "You told the truth, and the truth prevailed." Robyn came close slowly, her face smeared with tears. "Gwen," she breathed, "I know my words can't undo the past, but I want you to know I'm proud of you. You spoke out when all of us remained silent." For a fleeting instant, the three women enveloped Gwen as a protective shield, not as co-wives, but as mothers, as sisters, as women who at last recognized the burden Gwen had bore in isolation for so long. And then, Kody. He approached Gwen slowly, each step ponderous. His eyes overflowed with tears he had been too proud to weep earlier. When he stood before her at last, his voice shook. "I should have protected you. Instead, I failed you. I'll never forgive myself for that." Gwen stared at him, her eyes scanning his. For years she had wished for those words. But now they seemed almost too little, too late. She nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me. But healing is my decision now, not yours." Kody nodded, his tears finally bursting through. And then, Gwen looked past him, to the woman sitting alone at the table. Meri's collapse. Meri sat stiffly, her lawyer whispering in her ear. But she didn't respond. She stared straight ahead, her face pale, her body trembling. For years she had controlled the narrative, convinced herself she was justified. But the jury's verdict had stripped her of that illusion. She leapt upright, her chair scraping on the floor, and bellowed across the courtroom. This isn't the truth. You're all turning on me. I did everything for this family. Her voice broke, nearly on the verge of hysteria. Reporters' pens scribbled frantically across their notepads, recording every word. Christine winced, Janelle frowned, Robyn covered her mouth, and Gwen gawked in shock. The judge pounded his gavel. Order in the court. But Meri's words still rang out after she had to sit. Her meltdown was not just a show of rage. It was the cry of a woman who knew she had lost everything. Her family, reputation, and now her future. The family fractures outside the courthouse. There were flashes of cameras. Reporters were yelling questions. Christine, how do you feel about the verdict? Gwen, what's next for you? Kody, do you still stand with Meri? The family attempted to shove it under the rug, but the world was waiting. Christine finally exhaling, tears streaming down her face. This wasn't about revenge. This was about truth. And now Gwen can finally begin to heal. Janelle adding staunchly, families are meant to protect their children. We failed Gwen, but today we did what was right. Robyn, continuing to sob, whispered, this is a tragedy for all of us. But I hope this marks the start of healing, not continued division. And Kody, when asked if he still believed in Meri, he gazed directly at the cameras. His voice weighed with finality. No, I stand with Gwen. The world gasped. The headlines were already being written. The verdict that changed everything to Gwen. This was not merely a victory in a court of law. It was liberty. For the first time ever, the weight she had borne was no longer hers alone. For Christine, Janelle, and Robyn, it was an awakening. A reminder of the silence that had cost them so dearly. For Kody, it was the destruction of the image he had constructed. He was not the patriarch who had kept his family safe. He was the man who had watched and stood by as it fell apart. And for Meri, it was over. The verdict had removed the facade she had maintained for all those years. And what was left was a woman alone, broken, and who was left to deal with the aftermath of her decisions. As they walked away from the courthouse, the world knew one thing for sure. The Brown family would never be the same. The verdict hadn't concluded a case.